Hello everyone, thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy painting this beautiful picture with me. Let's begin. So we are going to get started with a small canvas. It doesn't have to be large. I know the larger ones can be a little intimidating. And we're going to do the water scene. So we want to draw a line for the horizon. Because you want space for sand and beach, then we want space for water, then we want space for sky. You're kind of going to imagine it in thirds. So we're going to sort of draw a line about a third of the way up. Okay. You can actually sketch in some clouds if you want something to kind of use as a guide. And then we're going to imagine the water sort of going about another almost third of the way up. Now the trick with this one is the water has to be a flat line, but the sand doesn't. So with the water, you really want to make it nice and flat. You can even use a ruler. We tend to actually arch when we're drawing lines. So even if you hold your finger against the canvas and run it along, and it's very easy to correct them. This is just a sketch to get you started. For the side, we're going to do some trees. So you want to make the focal point kind of in the middle, and we're going to work outwards. You don't have to draw these lines, it's just a guide. So we want to sort of make it even and balanced. And so we're going to do some grasses, maybe a tree that's arching over top. You could even do something that's drooping, like the Hawaiian tropic trees. Okay. And then for the sand in the beach, we're going to add one item off to the side. So we've got a tree here. We can counter that, add balance, go to the opposite side, and we're going to paint a log on the beach. It's going to be behind the grass. So the grass is going to be at the forefront, and the log is going to be in the background. But in the farther background, we have the water, of course. So the log is going to be a little bit rough on the end. A rather large log. And we'll get into the details later. So what we want to do is make sure you've done a light sketch. If you haven't, you can just go over and give it a light little eraser. So we don't need these lines on here. Okay. And we're going to start with one wash. So we're just going to do a wash of color on each section, which will really help us out for our painting and help guide us where we need to go. So there's different brushes that you can get. There's a nice big square base brush that will help for larger areas. And then we've got our smaller one that's pointed that we can do the detail work on. Push it to the side there. We'll get our palette ready. So we are going to start with Tropical Blue from the dollar store. Very simple, affordable. It's really light, so you can do a nice wash over everything. Make sure you have your water ready. So we want to take some of our water and add that, just a wet brush, to the blue, just to kind of get it a little bit softer and fainter, very light. So we're going to do a light wash right over top of the sky. Don't forget to do your sides. And it's okay if you have gaps. This is not an important part. It helps you in remembering what's going where, gives you ideas. It can be intimidating looking at just a white canvas, but this is just a start. Okay, and we want to add slightly darker, so we're going to do kind of a purple color. So we want our blue and our red. Okay, the red is the bright red. And this is kind of made a darker color, so you're just blending the two of them together. Trying to do about a 50-50 percentage of each. And just paint that along where your water would be. It doesn't have to be accurate. It's just making the canvas a little less intimidating to work with. You can even do a little bit coming in. We'll make that bubbles later, like the tide. Perfect. Should look something like that. The next one we're going to do is the sand. Of course, you want kind of a yellow-brown color. If you've bought brown, that's great. If not, we have to make brown. So we're just going to get a little bit of the yellow. And we're going to combine those together. Try to do 50% of both. And it's okay if it has a little extra yellow. This is kind of going to add some undertones. It'll create some depth to the painting. It's almost made a green, hasn't it? A little more red. Okay. Now we've got kind of a peachier color. So try not to jam your brush, try to do sweeping motions. And we want to fill in the rest of the white. There we go. That should help you out a little bit. So we'll dab our brush. We're going to do some distance. So when you look at the distance of the sky, you really want to look at colors you're seeing. Not just the fact you're seeing sky, but what are you seeing in that sky? And you'll notice that where the horizon is a lot lighter than where it is farther up. It gets darker and richer. So we're going to add some white down here, and we're going to start blending it upwards and out. That'll give us some perspective. So I like to turn my canvas to the side, or even turn it upside down completely, if that's what's easier for you. That way you're not putting your hands on the wet side. We're going to get the white, just very simple white. And we can start off with the complete color. I'm using the pointed tip, and we're going to go very carefully right along the water line. If you're really scared about making a mistake, you can use a ruler. I've got one here, and you can see it's already got paint on it because I do this sometimes. And you can actually put it right across your horizon. You really want to make sure that you're trying to be level though. If your horizon is off, everything's off. So we're just going to measure this. Got my pencil. And we're looking at about 1 3/4 inches. We're going to do the same on this side. 1 3/4 inches. We did a pretty good job when we were estimating at the beginning. And just draw a really light little line there. Okay. So we can put the ruler on here, right at that line. We could even use the bigger brush. We're just going to dip it in the white and we're going to go straight across, okay? It's alright if you make a mistake, it's easy to fix. And just go right across a few times. We're going to carry that up, just the straight white paint. And when you get these little dipples or marks that you can see where it's picking up the grain of the canvas, add some water and the paint will sink into the grain. And blend that outwards and upwards. So we can add more paint and just keep going over it until you get the light that you want. There you go. Gently remove. There you are. So try to make sure you get the edges. If the edges intimidate you, what you can do is actually just paint one solid color all the way around the ends until you get used to that idea. Careful that your yellow may still be slightly wet. We're just going to try to line that up right about there and just smudge upwards. And this is just for fun, so you don't have to be perfect. There you go. And you can add a little white along the top. Just to help everything blend, it really gives it a smoother appearance, very calming and soothing. Okay. Now we're gonna add a little extra darker blue at the top. So the blue that I had brought out before is a Copenhagen blue. If you can pick that one up, it's darker than the one that we had, the tropical, as you can see. So we're going to add a little bit of that Copenhagen. And you don't need a lot, a little bit goes a long way. We're going to turn our canvas again. And we're going to actually start on the outside and work our way down. And you want it to be a little bit watered down. You don't want it to run, but just lighter. So we're going to do a very light base. So I like to dip my brush in and then wipe some off of the excess and just go across the top. And you'll see with the white already being wet that it'll blend a lot nicer. And you want to kind of make lines. If you look at the sky, it's not one even color. There's clouds, there's mist, there's humidity, there's sun rays, and it changes. But it's light and gentle, and that's how we want to be. So you can add a little bit of white for detail, and we're going to add that farther down. So this is more in the distant. Very light touch, very little paint. and I would leave that there. So we've got our sky. We're going to let that dry for now. We're going to start working on the water. I like to kind of work my way down. The water, again, we want to make darker in the background, lighter in the foreground. We're going to start with a dark paint at the back and work our way forward. So I'm just going to wash off that white. And we're going to dip our brush into the darker blue. And we can add depth and colors and shades and tints to it afterwards. We're going to start very delicately right near the horizon. So the ocean is also going to have layers of colors and tones like the sky, but the difference is it's darker and richer. So we need darker blues, off-whites. We could do a little speckle detail of white at the end for some glistening sunshine. We could also add a little green in there, like seaweed. Sometimes the ocean can have that hue to it, but if you're looking at water, even a lake, really look at the colors you're seeing in the water, not just the fact you're seeing water. What colors are you seeing? There could even be a little purple with the shadows and shading. There could be a little gray. We're going to start with mixing our blue with black. So we're going to do a shade. Got my simple black here. Remember, you don't need a lot. And I'm going to keep using this long brush on the flat edge, just because we're putting on our base colors. Afterwards, when we want to go into the detail, we'll do the fine brush. So just a little bit of the black, mix it with some of the blue. And you're going to add a few lines in as well. These can be thicker lines because we are going to be going over some of them in detail. But we really want to make sure that we capture the depth of the water, how deep it is. Remember, we naturally have a curve to our brushing, so make sure you try to stay as straight as you can. It's really hard to do. So I tend to turn my canvas. Add some more blue, a little bit of black. Now some patches in the distance could have darker and some patches could be lighter. It's not all one. That will also give you more depth. And make sure you do your ends. I find this just finishes off the painting really nicely. I mean, you don't have to do it. I just think it really gives it a nice finishing touch, especially if you're going to give this as a gift to somebody. And try to line it up to carry it through to the next side. And we can do a couple little waves at the front. That'll just add some texture. And now we want to do different shades of that. So we're going to add a little extra black and make it darker again. We're going to add small details. coming together very nicely. Looks gorgeous. So while that's drying, we're going to move on to the sand. We can't, unfortunately, always just work in the water. Because that is wet, if you start trying to add highlights and details and lighter colors, it's just going to blend, smudge, and melt together. You're not going to see the detail. So we need to let that dry, and we're going to start working on the sand. So we're going to actually make a couple tints. We're going to use our yellow, add white. We're going to even make our orange and add white to get kind of that peachy color. And we're going to put that in the sand. So we're going to make our orange with our yellow and red. It's a nice orange color. So now we've made our orange. I've put a little bit on the canvas just to kind of add some more depth. It'll help with blending, especially when we add white. So we're going to add white to our orange now. And we're going to do this gradually, so you just add a little bit. And this just gives it more detail. It's a nice peachy color. And it doesn't have to be flat like the horizon along the waterline. We really can go rough with it. Blend that all the way along and make sure you get your sides. There we go. So now the sky is already dry. We're going to go back and start working on that. I feel like I want my sky to be a little bit lighter, so I'm going to add more white, but I'm going to change my water and wash my brush to make sure I get a nice clean white. So make sure you remember to do that. So I'm back with some fresh water. We're going to start on the sky. I want to make mine a little bit whiter, kind of really blend in, give it wider space so it makes it look like the water is farther away. So the more white space I give it here, the deeper this looks, right? That's what we're working for. So we're going to take some white, put that aside. I'm going to actually turn this upside down again. I'm going to start with just my white, not watered down. I'm going to try and go as close to the horizon line as we can. And you can come up. The nice thing about these paints is they stay wet for quite a while, so we can water it down and add some more depth in a little bit. And it's okay if you're not perfect. Life is not perfect. This is supposed to be fun, remember that. So I can see the grain on my canvas at the top. I'm going to actually use a little water to help water that down and blend it in. And because my white has traveled pretty far up, I'm going to add a little extra blue and get that to blend with the white again. So we're just going to make sure that it's damp, not dripping wet, but just damp. It'll help the paints blend. And we're going to add a little bit of that Copenhagen blue to the top. So our sand is wet and our sky is wet. So I would just suggest that you maybe take a break or look at what you want to put in here next. Google a picture of a tree that you want, or look up an example of a log so you can get some depth and understanding. We'll go through all of that. I did purchase a couple brown colors. This one is burnt umber. It's from the dollar store. And this one is a cinnamon brown. There is actually a bit of a difference. The cinnamon brown has more of a red hue, whereas the burnt umber is deeper. I still find when I do a log or trees, trunks of trees, branches, I like to use both. I tend to use the burnt umber with like a little bit of black as the base to really give it some depth and shadow. And then I use the cinnamon maybe mixed with a little bit of white to add the details in the lighter to make it look rounded. So even with this lighting, when you look at this, you can see that there's a light source here and then it goes darker. And we're going to use that burnt umber on the darker side and the cinnamon kind of up here, and then the white with the cinnamon added up here, and then just white to give it detail and depth. So that's kind of what we're going to go for with the log. So our sand is dry, our water is dry, and our sky is dry. So we're going to work a little bit more with the sand. I want to lighten it up. I did actually buy those browns, so we're going to use the brown with some white. I'm going to start with the cinnamon brown. Remember to put your paints in the palette separate and then mix them together. So I'm going to get a little brown, add some of the white to it. And we're going to put that kind of at the entrance in a way. So if we're going to have grass on both sides, we want to make it look like you could just walk into the painting. And so we're going to add a bit of a path here. And it's going to come up this way. So to make that a little more washed out, we can add the water. And I like to do kind of dots or stamping. I find that kind of adds a texture like sand would have. And you will see that in the final painting. Near the water, the sand can be wet, which would look darker, right? So we're going to use a little extra of the brown and mix that in. And we're going to kind of do layers of brown. Now you could use your larger brush if you want, and you could stamp down. Just don't stamp down too hard. You really don't want to push the bristles in, and you'll split them and damage the hairs. So I'm using the side of this brush and just tapping down the side, which will protect my brush and still give me the same detail. The nice thing with sand is you want different shades of brown. Sand is like never one color straight across. When you've got people walking on there and the wind blowing and the sun and the water, it looks different textures, different colors, which is really great for more depth. So we're going to kind of do that in our painting. And we're just going to add different details. Make sure you spread out your colors as you're mixing them. They're going to be slightly different every time. So you want to try and move around a little bit so that the change is gradual across the board. You don't want to just stick with one side with one color you make and then make another color for the other side and it's going to look completely different. So this is very light, so I'm going to use that in the middle here. And sometimes when you get a little brown and white where it's left its mark, it's actually really nice to leave those details. So I've zoomed in for you so you can actually see what I'm working with the sand. When you get the white and brown, it's kind of nice to leave those details because it really gives it more depth, makes it look a little more real. So we're going to keep working with our brown and white, and we're just going to do layers of different colors. Because we're adding white, it's actually a tint, so we're doing different tints along the board. Don't forget about the other side of your path. So now we've done a lot of the sand. You can see there's different textures, different colors. We're going to work on the sides. Don't forget to do your sides. And I have a little bit of orange there I still have to fill in. If that was too fast, which I'm sure it probably was because I sped it up for you, you're more than welcome to pause the video and finish your sand. So this is where we want to do the nice smooth entrance. We can see the grain, so we're going to add a little water just to get rid of the grain on the canvas. There we go. And dab that so it blends in with everything else. And what I've done is I've actually done darker where we're going to do some of the grasses, which is really great to add more depth. So we're going to grab some of this burnt umber. And you just want the smallest dab on your brush. You can even wipe some off, do a little pat test, and then start in the bottom and just work your way across and up. And it's just going to go behind the grasses to make the sand look a little darker. It's hiding in the shade behind the plants, and it's not getting that sun. Okay. We're going to do the same on the other side. Don't be scared if you screw up. This is really easy. really easy to fix. You're just blending browns and peaches and creams and whites. It's very easy to go over it 5 times, 10 times if you want to, until you get the look that you want. So I'm going to flip it to the sides and do my edges. This doesn't get as much attention, so it doesn't need to be as perfect or as you want on the front. We can still keep with the darker near the water. And then you can add little bits of brown as you go and kind of blend it in. And it's a lot easier to create depth by doing it, blending right on the canvas. If you can see that there, so much easier. So we're going to do the same on this side. So we're going to do a little bit of brown near the water where it would be darker. Smudge that down, do a couple dots. We're going to blend our light cinnamon brown and white to make that tint that we want. And we're going to blend that over top. And they will merge together really nicely. And you want to add some details like some footprints or anything, some textures. Take a few bits of brown and just kind of daub them in while it's wet. There you go. So we're going to do this bottom here. Very simple. You can even see the brown and white, and I'm blending them on the painting as we go. Remember the grass was here and it was a little darker. So you want to keep that kind of going, the same theme across to the sides from what you had at the front. There we go. I'll lay that down delicately. Okay. And we can work on our water. So we're going to add a little detail of green. I really love adding green just because it makes it feel a little more wild, like there's life in the water. So I have a Christmas green that I purchased, which is really light. You can also make green with the blue and the yellow. And we're going to use our pointed brush. We're not going to wet it just yet. We're going to see how this goes. But I do want to add the detail, and I don't want to touch the sand. So what I will do sometimes is use a bigger brush as a base, and I'll put my hand on the desk, put the end of the paintbrush on the desk, and rest my hand on it. And that will allow me to paint over top of the wet spot. So you're kind of making a little bridge as you paint. Now we don't want a lot of green, it can be too much, but we are going to put it near the shoreline as if it was being washed ashore. And we're going to start adding some lighter blues, almost like the surface. So now we've got the depth. We're going to start adding some lighter blues to the top. So we can actually use the tropical blue, or you can use whichever blue you have and add some white to it. I'm going to add some white to mine. Sometimes if I don't want to get my paintbrush covered in paint, I will use the end of the brush to mix. When you're using wooden brushes like this one, just be careful because you will actually take the coating off. This one's plastic, so we don't have to worry. So it's just a little bit lighter. And I find it's easier to remove that way. So we're going to make sure that your brush is nice and pointed. We're going to go in with a little bit of the green. Make sure that you don't have a dot of green at the end dripping off because you'll make a dot on there. We want lines. So I'm going to start here. And the nice thing with doing these now is you can always fix it and correct it with the lighter blue or whites or a dark blue if you really have to after the fact. So don't worry about screwing it up. We're going to do a nice solid sweep across. And then you want to move kind of down a little bit. Do another one. You can lift your hand up and down to create different strokes, bigger ones, lighter ones. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing here with the green. It almost blends in with the blue, which is what we want. We want it to blend in and be part of nature. And you're going to go along the shoreline doing this. And it doesn't have to be a straight line. Life is definitely not straight. And you might want to go over it a couple times. So I just had the idea of adding a little island in the distance, and I think that would be really great. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our brown and add a little bit of black. You want like a really dark, almost soil or stone. And we're going to do a tiny little island right in the distance. So we're actually going opposite of the tree. The tree is over on the right-hand side. We're going to do the small island on the left-hand side to kind of balance it out. You will have the trunk of the tree down here, which is also very grounding. It's as if you want to come and sit on the log and look out at the water. So we're going to take our brown, add the tiniest bit of black. So you want a really deep, muddy brown. And you don't have to be too specific. We're going to do the same thing like we did with the green. And we're going to add the island. So I've got my paintbrush that I'm resting my hand on. We're going to come out here along the horizon. You can come up a little bit and make it deep. There's going to be rises and drops. So that's a nice sized island. That's all you need. It's really not a lot. What we're going to add to that next is some trees on top of the island. It's basically just going to look like little green dots or spikes, but we want it to be darker. And then we'll add a couple highlights. So we're going to grab our Christmas green there, or if you have a darker green, add the tiniest bit of black to that. And you've almost made a hunter green. Again, you don't want drops of paint, you just want a little bit. And we are just going to paint that above the island. And the bigger they are, the bigger the tree will look, so you really don't want giant trees. This is the darker green. And then we're going to let that dry and we'll go over it with some lighter green for detail. You can even put a couple little lonely trees out here if you want. Yeah. Now with that darker green, we could add that to the water if you really want, but I want to get started with some of the blue. So we've got a lighter blue that I've made with the tropical blue, and I've just added some white to it. And we're going to start drawing some lines, so we need to add some shimmer, some light to this water. What I like to do when I'm doing water is roll my brush putting it on and rolling it as you go creates these beautiful little lines. And if you find you're getting the grain, add a little water. And we're gonna water down some of the blue quite a bit. You can put some aside, add a little water to it. And we're gonna put it at the front because you'll almost have like washing waves with that bubbly foam, and it's very white and clear. It doesn't have the depth. So we're just gonna put kind of a glaze of that right over top near the front. And we're gonna add some white to this after as well. And you just kind of paint around your green. You can paint over the green if you want. That'll make it look like some of it is under the water. And we're going to take more of this watered down blue and we're going to add it in at the depth. What I like to do is little tails on the waves that I've made. So we've made waves with these light blue, but they can be a little sharp in their ending. So I like to use a watered down color of the same color, just watered down, and I like to just trail it along at the ends to make it feel a little softer, a little more natural. And we're going to do that all the way along, and you're going to keep switching between blues and whites. So I'll zoom out and we'll work on the other side of the painting you can't see. So we're going to do some more of those blues on this side because I haven't gotten to that part yet, as you can see. So again, you get the blue on your brush. We don't want a dot. You want to make sure it's still pointed. And we're going to spin our brush and kind of lift and drop as we go. So it'll give us really nice waves. All the tricks of the trade here. Okay. And now I want to use my watered down blue, and I'm going to go in with a little bit of highlight. So we're going to make sure it's pointed, it's watered down, and we're just going to do little wisps or tails on the ends of these waves to make them a little bit more natural. Now I like to get out my finer brush for some of this detail, especially in the background where we want to make it really fine and light. So if you're going to invest in any paintbrushes at all, most of mine are from the dollar store. The only ones I really like to buy that are expensive and good quality is these really tiny fine ones. So this black one here is a Cornell, it's a Filbert 10/0. The red one here is a Royal Fine Sable 3/0. And then this black one here is 2/0 Curries. It's getting a little old and tattered, but it is still doing the job. So if you can see how fine that is it. And I find they are really great for detail work. That's why I have 3 of them. But if you want to invest in any paintbrushes at all, I do suggest getting one of these. Now I'm going to use the white and very lightly, just the end of it. And I'm going to go way out in the back, and we're going to do little dots. So that'll look like the sun is kissing the waves. Okay. I do like to go in with a little white and add a couple really fine lines, really little ones, just to add some white waves. And we're gonna have to fix some of these because I'm already screwing it up. But that's the joy of painting. So I'm gonna get some of my deeper blue. We're gonna use the Copenhagen one. You can also get there by mixing primary blue with purple, which is a little bit extra red, but mostly blue. And we're going to add some little details of that one. Mix some water with it to make it really fine. And that'll go, if you put it over top of the light blue that you put on, the tropical blue, it does add some depth because you can still see the tropical blue through it. Now you might look at that and think it's a lot of chaos. There's a lot going on. And sometimes I do find that. I put a lot of colors, there's a lot of depth, there's a lot of layers going on. It can be a little too much for the eyes. So what we can do is really light water wash almost over top. So we're going to use that Copenhagen blue, very little bit of it, and you're going to use quite a bit of water. And very delicately brush it over just once. The other way. We're going to let that dry, and then if we need to do that again, we can. But what we're going to work on is the front here, adding the white. So I'm going to use my bigger round brush there, the pointed tip. I'm going to get some white, add water, and you want it a little bit transparent. And we're just going to go along with the waves, and you're going to kind of rustle it across the shore. Waves are never perfect. So don't be afraid. We're going to let this dry, and we're going to go over this again. Remember, that's what gives you your depth, is the layers. And I think I want to do my sand darker near the water. It's not quite as dark as I was hoping for. So I'm going to take some of that burnt umber, and I'm going to add a little bit of the cinnamon brown to it. And just very delicately, right near the shoreline, we're going to kind of go along the sand and add a little bit of texture. So you're just doing some dots very delicately. And we're going to leave our little path open. We want to make it inviting. Make sure you do your sides. So that will give us some depth around the water and the waves. What I want to do is add some detail of grains of sand in the front entrance, kind of give it some texture. If you live near a beach and you pick up sand, you can actually glue it right on the canvas, which looks amazing. But if we don't have that, we can make it ourselves. Very similar to how you made the sand and how you just made that shade. We're going to do different shades of brown, but of course you want it darker than the sand itself so that it stands out. So I'm just doing a mixture of the two browns with a little bit of white. And very delicately, you're just going to do asymmetrical, so uneven, little dots at different pathways, different sizes, different depths, different angles. And we're going to put it up towards our path that we're making. Now I want to add a little gray to that to kind of give it almost that stone texture. So we're going to mix black and white. We're going to make our gray, and then we're going to add a little brown to that. When you're satisfied with your color, we're just going to do a couple little dots around these ones as well. So you want the edges of the sand to be uneven. You don't want to make a perfect circle. You don't want to make a perfect line. So kind of go out a little bit in some areas just to give it a little unevenness, a little more realistic. So I want to do that again. I'm going to add slightly different color, so a little more brown to my gray. If you really look at sand, it isn't all the same color. So when you're painting a picture and you're out in nature and you want to paint something beautiful, really look at the colors you see. Do you see blue? Or do you see blues and purples and violets and lavenders and reds and greens? Or is it just blue? Now I'm going to go a little close to black, very, very dark, just for a couple details, just to add a little extra depth. Be very careful with this one. It can really take away from your painting if you do too much. It just pulls the eye in, and you don't want that. And if you do too many, you can go over top of it with the gray or the brown again. Very easy to fix. Okay, just enough. So our sky is nice and dry. We're gonna work on some clouds. I'm running out of space on my palette. So for the clouds, we're gonna start with a gray, and we're gonna do the kind of the underbelly underneath of them. So if I've got the tree on this side, the little island on this side, we're gonna do sort of some waspy clouds there. And I'm gonna use my square brush, and make sure you have clean water because you're using white and you don't want it muckied up with any of the other colors or browns we've been working on. Okay, so we have our fresh water. Brush is nice and clean. We're going to work on the clouds, and we're going to do some sweeping motions. So you can almost see it like that, and then we're going to add some wisps in. So that's just damp, that's just water, but you can get the idea of what we're going to do. Okay, so we're going to start with our white, and we're going to make the waves wisping up the side, and you're just going to see them very lightly, like a bright sunny day. So I'm going to turn my canvas a little bit because I am right-handed and it makes it a little easier. You want your white, and you want it very watered down. So they're almost not even there. You can always add more color, it's harder to take it off. We're gonna do lines, and you're just gonna let them kind of hang a little bit. Leave them with a little ruffled edges, not quite even. That's perfect. I'm gonna let that dry. That's it. Nice and simple. So we are gonna work, while we have white, we're gonna work on the water scene here. I've got white on my brush. I'm gonna do little dots and just kind of get some more texture going. And it's okay to go on the sand a little bit because it's so watered down. It will actually make it look like the water's just receded, just waved up and then receded, which is really great. It does some of the work for you. Let the paint do the work for you. Remember not to be too straight and rigid. Go with the waves. And this is our entrance, so we're really going to soften that. We want to make it look very welcoming. Now the background for the water, I still want to lighten that up. It's just a little dark. We're going to use that lighter blue, and we're going to add some white to it. So I have the tropical blue and white. Very, very light and watered down. And we're just going to go over top of what we have. I know it looks scary, it looks like we just erased everything we did, but it is a wash, remember that. So we're just going to let that dry. And don't forget to do your sides. Make sure you don't leave any dots on this side, that everything blends in. I'm going to let that dry. So we're going to get started on our log now that our sand is dry. If you need to draw it back in, you can. I'm going to just use my flat brush and paint it in. I know that we're sticking with browns, so any brown will do just to get you started, to get the size and the shape ready. So I'm going to use my lighter cinnamon brown. And I know we were about here, it was tucked behind the grass. And even if you start in like where you think the middle of the log would be, and to help it balance out with size and proportions, I don't want it much closer to my path because the tree is going to be here. We've got the land there, the log here, and the path here. So you kind of have a circle going, and everything has its own space and room to breathe. You really don't want any pinch points where things are touching or it's catching the eye. You really want your viewer to look at the whole image. So the middle of our log is going to be about there. And I want it to be about that big. And it's going to have rough edges. And logs, again, are also not perfect. So it's okay if your lines are shaky. And maybe it's going to have a little branch sticking out. So we're going to leave that out there. Now it can or cannot go down the side, that's up to you, if that's what you want to do. I'm going to add in darker colors now. The color that I had made for some of those stones was a brown with the gray, the black. I'm going to add that in at the bottom here. See how much darker that is? That will add to our shadow effect. So that is great. You can add little details underneath, and we really want to make sure we get a little detail underneath that branch to make it look like it's 3D. So you're just going to add with the tip of your brush, or you can use the small brush, a little detail under the bottom of that branch, and you could even add a little like a shadow on the log. So I like to do a couple little dots or lines on the way up. When I'm working with a log to create wood, I like to do a couple little lines moving up the branch or the tree, which gives it a little more of that grain effect of bark. We're going to let that dry for a second here. And we can actually add some darker colors behind the grass. So we want to do this sand texture down here because it's going to be kind of grass that's not exposed to the sunlight all the sand exposed to the sunlight all the time. So we can get our small detailed brush that we had purchased. And we're going to start with just the standard burnt umber that we had purchased and do a couple dots in there. Try not to be symmetrical. You want asymmetrical or uneven pattern. And we want like a little bit of a hill. And you can have it taper off going into the painting, which leads your eyes inward. And then we're going to use some of that brown and gray that we had made. And I definitely think we're going to have to mix the brown with the black. It'll almost make it look wet. Should be really nice detail. A little brown, a little black with that. And delicately just do a few dots. Try to be asymmetrical. And this color is actually a great color to use underneath the log. So if the sun is shining in from the water, you're not really going to see the brightness under the log as you would above it. So we have to add some shadow here and make the log look a little more realistic. So I'm going to use the same color that I have on here and go underneath the log the best that I can. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. And the nice thing about these paints is they don't dry extremely fast because we're going to water it down and create the shadow effect. Let the paint work for you. Okay. Now wet your brush. Make sure that you've got enough on there. That's not dripping wet, but it's just damp. And we're going to take it near and just do a few dots to get some of that water off, right near the dark, and then kind of push it outwards along the line you painted and blend down just a little bit. Because we're not sure how much of this is really going to blend, and we want to work it out in a gradient fashion and make it lighten. So you don't want a hard brown line. A little more water. So this brown, I don't have enough. So we're going to add a little more. There we go. Add that shadow in there. Now really wash your brush well. You can even use the nice square brush that we have. Make sure it's wet, not dripping wet. You can dab it off. And we're just going to very delicately kind of smudge and blend and pull. It's not working. There you go. I want more brown and black there. Now this is wet enough. I can kind of move it around, but you see how it's creating a bit of a line? There. There's enough water that it's actually blending for you. Isn't that great? So we also don't want to leave it with these lines, so you're just going to keep trying to blend and smudge them out. There. And that will dry beautifully. So we're going to let that dry. We're going to focus on the other side and doing this for the grass. So we had done different shades of brown. So I've got my brown and gray mixture. You can do your dark brown, you can do your brown with a little black and be asymmetrical. We're going to be uneven and just make kind of a random dots of wet sand piled up underneath the grasses. There you go. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to move this down. You can actually still see the seaweed in the waves, but I don't like how that is leaving a white line. I really want to work on that. So I've got my small brush. I'm going to dot it into the white. And we're just going to do very delicate little white dots. Just like when those little tiny waves splash across the shore. And they just sort of scatter the water. And you're not smashing your brush into the canvas, just very lightly. There you go. Now we're going to go back and add some more of these white dots of shimmering sun along the water. So you're just going to delicately get your brush a little bit of white paint. I'm going to use another brush as my support for my hand. You're going to try and stay in lines if you can help it. We're going to work on that log again. That's dry now. So I'm going to start with the lighter colors and work our way down. I'm going to tilt this to the side just a little bit because I'm right-handed. And we are going to take some of that cinnamon brown and we're going to add a little white to it. So very lightly and delicately, we're just going to trace across the top. And this color almost blends in with the sand, so be really careful. Now driftwood tends to be a little sun-bleached and washed out, so we can add a little gray to our light brown, the cinnamon brown. You don't want it the same color as what we've done in the shading. So we have to make a gray with some white and black. And you could water it down just a little bit so it's a little more delicate and smooth, the color. And we're going to paint that in small little lines across the wood to give it texture. Okay. Now we're going to use our burnt umber. I'm going to add a little white to that. And I'm going to use my pointed brush that we had earlier. We're just going to get the tip of that in the paint there. And we're going to run that along as some lines. So you just want to keep doing this with different kind of shades of brown to give it a little more depth and texture. For the highlights with the sun, this is just straight burnt umber. We're going to actually add a little yellow. And you want to try and blend some of these colors a little bit if you can. So I've wet my brush and I'm just kind of blending all the colors together. a really good time to go in with the darker brown and just do kind of the underbelly of the log. There's a little black in there. Now I'm not using blue for shading because we have enough blue in this painting already, and it'll just look odd. Okay. So we're going to take the burnt umber and add a little yellow. You kind of get an ochre color, and we're just going to kind of put that in as a little bit of detail. Just the tiniest amount. Okay, so I still want to add some more depth in here, so I'm going to take some of that burnt umber and add a little black to it. Remember to add a little black at a time. You can always add more, but you can't take it away once you've mixed it in. And I want to water mine down just so I have a little bit of a smoother line. So this obviously is not your only shadow color. We're going to add a little more black after and make it darker and go over some of it again. So leave gaps. Do it just like you did at the top. We're going to add a little more black. And we're going to add a little detail under the branch. And we're going to add a little bit to the rough areas because they're not all in sun. It's kind of hidden. So it looks broken and torn. And we could even add a couple, just add a squiggle as you go to make it look like bark. Remember to kind of do it uneven. Do 2 lines, 1 line, or 3 lines, and don't do them side by side. There you go. It's looking great. So I want to add a little more black to my brown. You really want to work in layers, just like we're doing. We're going to keep this near the bottom. You really don't want to go too far up. We're going to leave that there.